My name is Carol, I'm 65 years old, and on my only son's wedding day, I found my own picture at the entrance with a sign that read in big bold letters, "Do not let her in." Before I tell you how I made them regret every last second of that day, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The air at the Willows that afternoon was crisp, the kind of perfect Vermont autumn day you see in postcards. Golden leaves drifted down from the maple trees, settling on the manicured lawns that sloped down to the glittering lake. This was it. The day I dreamed of since my son Michael was just a little boy. A day I had paid over $50,000 for, every last cent from my retirement savings to make perfect. I'd sold my late husband's beloved boat to cover the last of the catering bill. I did it without a second thought because what is money when it comes to your child's happiness? I smoothed down my navy blue dress, the one I'd spent weeks looking for, and felt a familiar flutter of nerves in my stomach. These were happy nerves, I told myself. The good kind. I saw guests trickling in, men in smart suits and women in bright, rustling dresses, all smiling and laughing. But as I got closer to the grand oak doors of the venue, I noticed something odd. A few people I knew, distant cousins and old neighbors, saw me, and their smiles faltered for just a second. They'd quickly look away or give me a tight, awkward wave. It was strange, but I brushed it off. Wedding jitters, I supposed. They make everyone a little weird. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger as I approached the entrance, where a young man in a black suit, with an earpiece curling behind his ear, stood guard. He looked no older than my Michael. He gave me a polite but firm smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I see your invitation?" I laughed, a little surprised. "Oh, honey, I don't have one. I'm Carol, the mother of the groom." I beamed, expecting him to break into a welcoming grin and step aside. He didn't. His expression remained frozen, a mask of professional politeness. If anything, he looked even more uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I need to see an invitation, or at least find your name on the guest list." My smile faded. There must be some mistake. I'm Carol, Michael's mother. I paid for this whole event. My voice was starting to sound a little sharp, and I didn't like it. "If you could just step over here for a moment," he said, his voice low, gesturing to a small table set off to the side. An open binder lay on the crisp white linen. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And then I saw it. It felt like the world stopped turning. The cheerful music from the string quartet inside, the laughter of the guests, the rustling leaves. It all faded into a dull, roaring sound in my ears. Clipped to the very first page of the binder was a photograph. A recent one from my 65th birthday party just last month. I was smiling, a party hat perched comically on my head, surrounded by my family. My son, my daughter-in-law-to-be. Underneath my smiling face, printed in stark black letters that seemed to scream at me from the page, was a single brutal sentence. "Do not allow entry under any circumstances. Call the bride if there is an issue." It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of my lungs. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. This was an execution. Someone had taken that happy photo, a memory I cherished, and turned it into a wanted poster at my own son's wedding. A wedding I had funded. A wedding I had poured my heart and soul into. My hands started to shake. The young security guard was looking at me now with something like pity in his eyes, and that was somehow worse than anything. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over me. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. How could this have happened? What had I done to deserve this? This public crucifixion. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and pain. I thought back over the last few months, searching for a clue for a fight for any reason at all. And my memory snagged on a single moment. It all started 6 months ago. The day Michael and Jessica sat in my living room, the diamond on her finger sparkling under the lamplight as they announced their engagement. That moment, when they announced their engagement in my living room 6 months ago, felt like pure sunshine. It was a Tuesday evening, and the last rays of sunlight were slanting through the blinds, casting long shadows across the carpet. Michael, my only child, my whole world since his father Tom passed away from a heart attack 5 years ago, was practically bouncing on the sofa. Jessica sat beside him, looking serene and perfect, her hand held tightly in his. When he finally stammered out the words, "Mom, we're engaged," and she held up her hand to show me the ring, my heart felt like it would burst. The diamond was enormous, far bigger than anything I'd ever imagined for them, and for a fleeting second I wondered how they could afford it. But then Jessica was off the couch and throwing her arms around me, her cheeks soft against mine. "We're going to be a family, Mom," she'd whispered, and I'd hugged her back, tears welling in my eyes. In that moment I saw a future filled with holidays and grandchildren, a house filled with laughter again. I saw my son happy, and that's all any mother ever wants. I knew Tom would have been so proud. I resolved right then and there that I would do anything to help them get the perfect start. It was the least I could do with the inheritance Tom had left me. He would have wanted it to go towards his son's happiness, and I meant it. 2 weeks later, they sat at my kitchen table, brochures for houses spread out between the salt and pepper shakers. They'd found a charming little starter home in a good neighborhood, but the down payment was steep. "It's a stretch, Mom," Michael admitted, running a hand through his hair. "With my salary and Jess still paying off student loans." Jessica just looked at the brochure with a sad, wistful sigh that just about broke my heart. The next morning, I went to the bank and arranged the wire transfer. $40,000. My financial advisor raised an eyebrow, but I waved his concerns away. "It's not a loan," I told Michael and Jessica firmly as I showed them the confirmation slip. "It's a gift. A foundation for your future." Jessica burst into what I thought were real tears, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe and calling me her guardian angel. The generosity didn't stop there. A month after that, Michael's old beat-up sedan finally gave up the ghost on the highway. He was distraught. His credit was still recovering from some rough patches after college, and he was terrified he couldn't get a decent loan for a reliable car to get to his new promotion. Jessica called me in a panic. "I'm so worried about him, Carol. He's taking the bus, it's adding 2 hours to his day, and he's exhausted." The subtext was clear. So I went with them to the dealership that weekend, and when the financing manager looked doubtfully at Michael's application, I stepped in. I co-signed the loan for a brand new, safe, reliable SUV. My perfect credit record, built over 40 years of careful budgeting with Tom, for their peace of mind. Again, I didn't think twice. Then the wedding planning began, and Jessica was a whirlwind of expensive energy. She had impeccable taste, I had to give her that. But her taste ran towards designer dresses and venues that charged a premium for lakefront views. The numbers kept climbing at a dizzying rate. I'd see Michael's face tighten when another invoice came in, but Jessica would just laugh it off. "Oh honey, you only get married once. It has to be a fairy tale." Then she would turn those big, hopeful eyes on me, and I'd find myself pulling out my checkbook again. I was happy to do it. Truly. Their joy was my joy. But then the strange little things started. Incidents so small, so insignificant, that to mention them would make you sound paranoid and petty. It began with my keys. For 30 years since Tom and I bought this house, I've kept my car keys on a ceramic hook right by the front door. One morning they weren't there. I was going to be late for a cardiologist appointment, a checkup I'd had every 6 months since Tom's funeral, and I was in a complete panic, searching under cushions, checking my pockets a dozen times. Jessica, who had stayed over, watched me with a look of deep concern. After I had searched frantically for nearly an hour, she walked calmly into the kitchen, opened the freezer, and pulled them out from behind a bag of frozen peas. "Oh, Mom," she'd exclaimed, her voice dripping with a syrupy, gentle pity. "You've been so forgetful lately. Are you feeling all right?" I was so flustered and embarrassed, and so relieved to have found them, that I didn't stop to question how on earth they could have gotten there. A week later it was my reading glasses. They vanished from my nightstand. I couldn't read my book, couldn't see the newspaper. After I'd given up, Jessica found them in the guest bathroom cabinet, tucked behind a stack of old towels. "We really need to get you one of those tile trackers for your things," she'd said with a little laugh, patting my arm condescendingly. The final straw was a missed lunch appointment with Linda. Jessica had sworn up and down she'd heard me say it was on Thursday, not Wednesday. "Are you sure, Mom? I clearly remember you saying Thursday because you had that doctor's appointment on Wednesday." I had missed the appointment too. I started to believe her, to think I was genuinely losing my mind. Each time Michael would just offer a placating smile. "Mom, You're juggling a lot with the wedding plans. You're just stressed. Don't worry about it. He'd say it while looking at Jessica, a shared glance passing between them that I couldn't quite decipher. It was a subtle, insidious campaign of gaslighting, and it was working. I started to doubt myself, to question my own memory. I felt a creeping sense of unease, a fog of confusion I couldn't shake. I wanted so badly for everything to be perfect that I was willfully blind to the truth. I was so focused on building their fairy tale future, I never saw the snake coiling at its very heart. The night before the wedding felt like the final hurdle before the finish line. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private, wood-paneled room at the Oak Barrel, a steakhouse downtown where the air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic and old money. The low lighting cast a warm, forgiving glow on everything, and for a while, I let myself believe it was real. I had invited my best friend of 40 years, Linda, to be my guest. She was my rock, the only one who had known me before I was a wife or a mother, and her presence was a comfort. We sat at the long head table, a bottle of expensive red wine I had paid for breathing in a decanter between us. Michael looked dashing, if a bit overwhelmed. Jessica was breathtaking in a simple white silk dress, playing the part of the adoring soon-to-be bride to absolute perfection. Early in the evening, she leaned over and squeezed my hand. Her touch was cool. "None of this would be possible without you, Mom," she whispered, her voice a theatrical, breathy confection. "You're our angel." I felt a wave of genuine relief wash over me. "See," I told myself. "You were being silly. You were letting stress get to you." All my anxieties from the past few months, the misplaced keys, the condescending pats on the arm, seemed to melt away under the warmth of the restaurant lights. I was choosing to believe in the fantasy. The dinner plates were cleared, dessert was served, and then came the toasts. Michael's best man, a goofy young man named Paul, told a mildly embarrassing story about their college days that got a good laugh. Michael gave a short, sweet, nervous speech about how much he loved Jessica. Then Jessica stood up. She gracefully clinked her fork against a crystal wine glass, and a hush fell over the room of 50 guests. She held the room in the palm of her hand. She looked like a movie star. "I want to take a moment," she began, her voice as smooth and rich as the chocolate lava cake in front of me, "to give a very, very special thank you to my incredible soon-to-be mother-in-law, Carol." She smiled radiantly and raised her glass in my direction. I felt a blush of pleasure creep up my neck, and I smiled back, my heart full. When Michael and I started planning this wedding, we had a vision, a dream, and Carol didn't just share that vision. She took it over. There was a slight, almost imperceptible pause. A few of her bridesmaids, who had clearly been prepped, let out a little titter of laughter. My smile faltered. "Took it over? I mean that in the best way, of course," Jessica added quickly, with a disarming laugh. "Her guidance has been truly comprehensive. From the font on the napkins to the flavor of the cake, she has been involved in every single decision. We're so grateful for her meticulous attention to detail." The air in the room shifted. It was no longer warm and celebratory. It was cool and tense. The words were complimentary on the surface, but the subtext was venomous. Meticulous. Comprehensive. Not helpful. Not supportive. The way she said it, the slight emphasis she placed on each word, painted a picture of me as an overbearing, meddling mother-in-law, a steamroller who had flattened their own desires to get her own way. The truth was the exact opposite. I had simply written the checks for every one of her meticulous, comprehensive, and incredibly expensive decisions. She wasn't finished. She took a sip of wine and continued, her eyes sweeping across the room before landing back on me. "And of course, we have to thank her for her incredible financial generosity. Without it, none of us would be sitting in this beautiful room tonight." She made a grand gesture with her arm, as if to encompass the whole expensive affair. It's a wonderful thing when a mother is so invested in her son's new life, especially when it involves his father's inheritance. We are just so lucky that she was willing to share Tom's legacy with us. That was the kill shot. The mention of my late husband, of his hard-earned money, was a deliberate, cruel twist of the knife. It reduced my love, my grief, my desire to see his legacy live on through his son's happiness, into a mere financial transaction. It made me sound like a lonely old widow buying her son's affection. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying. My face was burning with a shame so intense I thought I might be physically ill. I felt trapped, pinned to my chair by the weight of their stares. She sat down to a round of polite, but noticeably more subdued applause. Michael, completely oblivious, leaned over and kissed her cheek. He had only heard the surface words, the hollow compliments, not the poison dripping from every syllable. But I saw it. And I knew from the quick, triumphant smirk she shot at her mother Brenda, that this had been a perfectly executed character assassination. Later, as we were waiting for our coats, Linda cornered me by the doorway. Her face, usually so warm and full of laughter, was grim. "Carol," she said, her voice low and urgent. "You saw that, right? That wasn't a toast. That was a declaration of war." I just nodded, my throat too tight to form words. The beautiful evening had become a nightmare. "That girl," Linda continued, her eyes boring into mine, "is a viper in a Vera Wang dress. She looks at you like you're a checkbook. You need to be so careful tomorrow." I wanted to believe she was wrong. I wanted to go home, curl up in bed, and wake up to find it was all a bad dream. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and replaying that toast over and over in my head, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. This wasn't just wedding stress. This was something else. Something ugly and deliberate, and I was walking straight into the middle of it. And that brought me back to the cold stone patio of the Willows. Back to the damning photograph, the pitying eyes of the security guard, and the hollow roaring sound in my ears. The toast last night had been a public slap, a subtle poisoning. This was a guillotine. My hands were shaking so violently, I had to brace one against the other to dial my phone. My thumb hovered over Michael's contact photo, a smiling picture of him from our last trip to the beach before Jessica. He looked so happy, so carefree. My boy. My sweet boy. The litany ran through my head like a prayer. He will fix this. He'll be horrified. He'll come storming out here, his face a mask of righteous fury. He'll wrap me in his arms and tell me it was all some horrible, insane mistake. He has to. It was the only thought I could hold on to. A tiny flickering candle in the hurricane of my emotions. I pressed the call button. It rang once, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence of my world. Twice. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the impending doom. "Mom? What's wrong?" His voice was clipped, impatient, the sound jarringly different from the warmth I was so desperate to hear. In the background I could hear the swell of the string quartet playing something classical and cheerful. A cruel soundtrack to the worst moment of my life. The party was going on without me. "Michael," I began, my own voice a thin, reedy thing I didn't recognize. It was the voice of a very old, very frightened woman. "Honey, there's some kind of terrible misunderstanding down here at the entrance. The security guard, he won't let me in." I waited for the explosion, the outrage, the protective roar of a son defending his mother. "What? That's insane. I'll be right there." Instead there was a pause. A dead, heavy, bottomless silence that stretched for 5, maybe 10 seconds. It was long enough for me to hear a woman's sharp, sibilant whisper in the background. It was Jessica. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of an order being given. Then Michael's voice came back on the line. It was flat, robotic, completely devoid of emotion. "Oh, that. He said the word as if I were a minor inconvenience. A fly buzzing at the window. A forgotten catering detail. It was a word that dismissed my entire existence, my entire role in his life. The blood drained from my face, and a dizzying wave of nausea washed over me. I had to put a hand against the cold stone wall of the venue to steady myself. "That?" I echoed, my voice trembling so hard the word was barely a whisper. "What do you mean, that, Michael? They have my picture. My face on a security list with instructions not to let me in. At your wedding. What in God's name is going on?" Another pause, this one even longer, more calculating. I could hear him take a deep, shaky breath. He was gathering his courage, not to defend me, but to sever the final tie. "Look, Mom," he said, and the forced, condescending patience in his tone was like a shard of glass twisting in my gut. We thought it would be better this way. Less drama." The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. "Drama?" I whispered, the sound lost in the rustling of the autumn leaves. What drama, Michael? When have I ever caused you drama? Have I done anything in your entire life but love you and support you? I could hear the desperation in my own voice, and I hated it. It's just you know how you get, he stammered, the words clumsy and rehearsed, clearly not his own. You get emotional and things can get overwhelming, and Jessica is under a lot of stress. We all are. We just wanted one day, just one, without any complications or emotional scenes. I couldn't breathe. It felt like a band was tightening around my chest. My entire life, my entire identity as his mother, every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every monster I'd chased from under his bed, every tuition check I'd written without a second thought, every sacrifice I had ever made, big and small, was being reduced to drama and complications. Jessica's wedding day stress was more important than my presence. My own son, the child I had brought into this world, was telling me that his wedding was better off without me. I'm your mother, I said, the words a raw, broken plea, the last defense of a dying heart. I gave you everything. I know, he said, and his voice was cold now, impatient, like a teenager shrugging off a lecture. He wanted this conversation to be over. I was an inconvenience he needed to deal with so he could get back to his party. But this is my day. Our day. Okay. Please just go home. Don't make this harder than it already is. And then with a soft click he was gone. The line went dead. I stood there, staring at the blank screen of my phone, the silence around me absolute and terrifying. He had chosen. He had listened to the snake whispering in his ear and had chosen her, and her twisted narrative over his own mother. He hadn't just stood by and let this happen. He had been a part of it. He had approved it. He had left me outside, alone and shattered and humiliated, while he went on with his perfect drama-free day. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the stone patio. He didn't just bar me from his wedding. He had carved my heart out with a dull spoon. And in that moment of unbearable, world-ending pain, something inside me snapped. The soft, pliable, unconditionally loving heart of a mother shattered into a million pieces. And as the dust settled, something new, something cold and hard and clear as diamond, began to form in its place. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside me, locked behind a wall of ice that had just formed around my heart. The pain was too vast, too absolute for something as simple as tears. It was a hollow, echoing chasm inside my chest, a place where a sun used to be. For what felt like an eternity, I just stood there on the patio, a ghost at a feast I had paid for. I watched the happy, oblivious guests file past me, their cheerful chatter and bursts of laughter sounding like they were coming from another planet, a world I no longer belonged to. They were heading to a party to celebrate a union built on my money and my humiliation. The young security guard, the one who had delivered the fatal blow, kept glancing at me, his expression a mixture of pity and professional apprehension. He probably expected me to cause a scene, to start screaming or collapse into a weeping heap on the manicured flagstones. But I did neither. With a strange newfound calm, I bent down, my knees cracking slightly, and picked up my phone. The screen wasn't even cracked. It was a small, absurd detail in the wreckage of my life. I turned my back on the grand oak doors of the Willows. I walked away from the soaring music of the string quartet, the twinkle of the fairy lights in the trees, the cloying scent of thousands of dollars worth of peonies. I walked away from the life I thought I had, and the son I thought I knew. But I didn't go home. The thought of my house, a sanctuary that was now a museum of a life that was a lie, was unbearable. Every photograph of a smiling Michael on the walls would be an accusation. Every handmade Mother's Day card tucked away in a drawer would be a cruel joke. So I walked to the parking lot, my steps even and measured, and got into my car. I sat there in the driver's seat, the leather cool against my skin, and stared at the back of a shiny new SUV parked a few rows down. The temporary license plate was still taped to the window. It was the one I had co-signed for. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of pain and confusion just moments before, was now eerily quiet. The emotional hurricane had passed, leaving behind a strange and terrible clarity. It was the clarity of a surgeon looking at a diseased limb that needed to be amputated. And in that crystalline quiet, a single powerful thought emerged and took root. They saw me as a bank, a transaction, an ATM that dispensed love and money in equal measure. My own son had just confirmed it. Don't make this harder than it already is. He wasn't talking to his mother. He was talking to a problem he needed to solve. They didn't want the person. They just wanted the purse. Okay, I thought, a cold, humorless smile touching my lips for the first time. Fine. My fingers, surprisingly steady now, flew across the screen of my phone, scrolling through my contacts. I bypassed Linda's name. I bypassed my sister's. I stopped at a name I usually only called during tax season, or when I needed advice on my investment portfolio. David Chan, my financial advisor for the last 15 years. David was a meticulous, no-nonsense man who guarded what was left of my and Tom's life savings with the ferocity of a dragon. He was exactly who I needed right now. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional, though tinged with surprise. Carol? Is everything all right? I thought the wedding was today. Hello, David, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was level calm, and as cold as the bottom of a lake. I am at the wedding. Or rather, I am sitting in the parking lot. They won't let me in. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost picture him in his sleek downtown office, leaning forward in his chair, his brow furrowed. I'm sorry, what? What do you mean they won't let you in? Carol, you liquidated the Miller Fund to pay for that venue. You paid for everything. His indignation on my behalf was a small, distant comfort, like a single candle in a dark, empty room. Yes, I know what I paid for, I said, that same chilling smile on my lips. And that's why I'm calling you. I have a few instructions. I need you to act on them immediately. No questions asked. David's voice became cautious, the professional advisor taking over. Carol, you sound upset. Perhaps we should talk on Monday. There is no Monday, David. I cut in, my voice sharp as broken glass. There is only now. All the final payments for today's vendors, the balance for the willows, the final installment for the photographer, the payment for the floral cleanup crew, the catering overages, they're all scheduled to be processed from my account on Monday morning, correct? That's right, he confirmed, his voice wary. I want you to start making calls, David. Right now. I want you to call every single one of them. The venue manager first. Tell them there has been a significant change in circumstances. Tell them the payment authorization from my accounts has been revoked, effective immediately. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of unspoken legal and financial consequences. Revoked. David finally whispered. Carol, that's a breach of contract. They could sue you. Let them, I said, my voice hardening to steel. The contract was between me and them to provide services for a family event that I was presumably a part of. As I have been publicly and officially barred from that event, I consider their end of the contract to have been breached first. They cannot accept my money while simultaneously treating me like a security threat. They made their choice, David. They wanted a wedding without me. I'm simply going to give them exactly what they asked for. I could hear the soft tapping of his keyboard. After a moment, his voice came back, all business. I'll need the vendor contact list you sent me last month. Who do I call first? And just like that, the gears of my revenge began to turn. They had drawn the battle lines. It was time for me to show them what it really meant to go to war. I emailed David the vendor list, a document I had so carefully compiled over months of planning. Each name on that list, the florist, the baker, the string quartet, represented a check I had happily written, a dream of theirs I had funded. Now it was a hit list. We synchronized our actions like something out of a heist movie. He would start with the big-ticket items, the venue and the caterer. I would handle a few of the smaller, more personal ones myself. It was 4:30 p.m. The cocktail hour was in full swing. Guests were sipping champagne I had paid for and nibbling on bacon-wrapped scallops I had selected. The timing had to be perfect. The pain had to be maximal. I hung up with David and sat back in the cool leather of my car seat. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos I was about to unleash. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel angry. I felt surgical. I was a doctor excising a cancer. It was a painful, messy business, but it was necessary for survival. My first call was to the florist, a sweet woman named Maria whose work was artistry. She answered breathlessly, likely in the middle of setting up the elaborate centerpieces for the reception. Maria, it's Carol, I said calmly. Carol. Hello. Everything looks absolutely breathtaking. Jessica is going to be thrilled. she gushed. My heart gave a painful throb. Maria, I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. I'm calling to inform you that the final payment, the remaining $6,000, will not be coming from my account. What? The cheerful energy vanished from her voice. What do you mean? Is there a problem with the arrangements? The arrangements are beautiful, I'm sure, I said, my voice even. The problem is that I have been barred from attending the wedding. I've been refused entry at the door. Therefore, I will not be funding an event that I am not welcome at. I am so sorry for this, but any further discussion about payment needs to be directed to the bride and groom, Michael and Jessica. There was a sputtering, shocked silence. I don't understand. I'll have to collect all the centerpieces if the payment isn't guaranteed. I understand completely, I said. You do what you have to do. I hung up and pictured the scene. Maria's team, marching into that beautifully decorated ballroom and stripping every table of its magnificent floral arrangements in front of 300 stunned guests. The image brought a grim, cold satisfaction. Next, I called the leader of the string quartet. The conversation was almost identical. Shock, confusion, followed by a panic statement that they would have to stop playing immediately. I think that's a wise decision, I told him. I sat back, the work done. The bombs had been planted. Now I just had to wait for the explosions. It didn't take long. At 5:17 p.m., precisely 47 minutes after my call with David, my phone lit up with Michael's name. The caller ID seemed to mock me. I let it ring, the sound vibrating against the car's center console. Let him sweat. Let him feel that first cold spike of panic that I had felt standing on that patio. He called back immediately, the second call coming just as the first one went to voicemail. This time I answered. I wanted to hear it. Hello, Michael. What did you do? His voice was a shrill, panicked shriek, a sound I hadn't heard since he was a child who had just broken a neighbor's window. In the background there was a cacophony of chaos. Raised voices, clattering dishes, and the unmistakable sound of a woman, Jessica, screaming at someone. I took a slow, deliberate breath, channeling a calm I didn't truly feel. I'm not sure what you mean, dear. I'm just sitting in my car, enjoying the lovely autumn evening, following your explicit instructions to not cause any drama. The caterers, he yelled, his voice cracking with disbelief. The venue manager just came to our head table, in front of everyone. He said the final payment of $25,000 was canceled. He said if the balance isn't paid by wire transfer in the next 10 minutes, he's shutting the whole thing down and calling the police for theft of services. The band is packing up their instruments. The florists are taking the flowers off the tables. Mom, what is happening? It sounds to me, I said, my voice as placid as a frozen lake, like there's a serious payment issue. You should probably have a talk with the bride and groom about it. Since I'm not there, it's really not my concern. It's their wedding. Their responsibility. There was a fumbling sound, a muffled curse, and then Jessica's voice, sharp and venomous, exploded through the phone. You did this. You bitter, evil, jealous old woman. You couldn't stand not being the center of attention for one day. So you decided to ruin everything. Jessica, I believe the words you're looking for are thank you, I replied, my voice still unervingly calm. After all, I've just saved your new family a considerable amount of money today. You should be grateful. Think of the head start it will give your promotion, or whatever new venture you're planning. Grateful. I'll have you sued for this. I'll tell everyone what you are. I'll get a lawyer. You will regret this for the rest of your miserable, lonely life. She was sobbing now, her words devolving into incoherent shrieks of pure rage. Then another voice cut in, this one older, with a nasal, grating quality that could strip paint. It was her mother, Brenda. Carol, you listen to me and you listen good. You have 5 minutes to call that venue and fix this. You will reinstate those payments or I swear to God, you will never see your son or any future grandchildren again as long as you live. This is emotional blackmail, you hear me? I almost laughed. The irony was so rich, so perfectly beautifully absurd. Brenda, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, charged with a sudden dangerous energy. Let me be very clear. Your daughter and my son made the decision to treat me like an unwanted stranger, like a criminal to be kept out. Strangers don't pay for 300-person weddings. The party is over. I suggest you tell the guests to grab a slice of cake on their way out, before the staff repossesses that, too. I ended the call mid-shriek. Then, methodically, I blocked their numbers. All of them. Michael, Jessica, Brenda. I sat in the growing twilight, a peaceful silence descending upon my car. In the distance, I could see a steady stream of confused-looking guests trickling out of the venue, heading toward the parking lot long before the reception was scheduled to end. A quiet satisfaction, cold and clean and absolute, began to settle in my heart. They wanted me gone. Now they were finally learning what gone really meant. It didn't just mean an empty chair at the table. It meant an empty bank account, and a future they would have to pay for themselves. The next morning, the silence in my house was a heavy blanket. No frantic calls, no angry texts pounding at the door of my digital fortress. It was an unnerving quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes a tsunami. I made coffee, my hands perfectly steady, and sat down at my kitchen table as the sun streamed through the window. For a moment it felt like any other Sunday. Then, against my better judgment, I opened Facebook. And there it was. A post from Jessica timestamped at 2:13 a.m. It was a professional photograph from the wedding, one of the few the photographer must have taken before the chaos erupted. She and Michael were posed by the lake, looking tragically into each other's eyes. He was holding her as if to protect her from a cruel world. The post itself was a masterclass in manipulation, a carefully crafted narrative designed to elicit maximum sympathy and outrage. I am utterly and completely heartbroken. It began. What should have been the happiest day of our lives was systematically and maliciously destroyed by my husband's mother, Carol. For months we have endured her controlling behavior and constant emotional manipulation. But we always held out hope that love and family would win in the end. We asked for one small boundary on our wedding day, just a few hours for us to start our marriage without her overwhelming and often critical presence. Her response was to unleash a nuclear option of pure spite, canceling every payment and leaving us humiliated in front of 300 of our dearest friends and family. To everyone who stayed, who hugged us through our tears and helped us pick up the pieces of our shattered day, thank you. You showed us what real family looks like. We are devastated, but today we are also free. Free from toxic, conditional love. Free from financial abuse. My stomach churned as if I'd swallowed acid. Financial abuse? The audacity was breathtaking. She had taken my generosity and twisted it into a weapon. The post had over 500 likes and nearly 200 comments. They were a torrent of sympathy for her and pure vitriol for me. What kind of monster does that to their own child? Pure narcissism. Jessica, you are so brave for sharing your story. Narcissistic mothers-in-law are a plague. My heart goes out to you. I hope you and Michael cut her out of your lives for good. She doesn't deserve a son like him or a daughter like you. This is a classic case of a parent who can't handle a custody change from their son to his new wife. So sad. I felt dizzy. She had framed the narrative so perfectly. She was the brave victim. I was the crazy, vindictive, mentally unstable mother-in-law. It was a story as old as time, and the court of public opinion was eating it up. She had taken my pain, the deepest wound of my life, and was parading it around for sympathy likes. I was about to throw my phone against the wall when I saw a new comment pop up. A notification I hadn't blocked. It was from Linda. Her words were like a splash of cold, clean water in a swamp of lies. I find this post incredibly interesting and frankly dishonest. Linda wrote, her digital voice precise and sharp. Because I was at the rehearsal dinner the night before this devastating event. I was there when the bride, Jessica, gave a so-called toast that was nothing more than a thinly veiled, passive-aggressive character assassination of the woman who paid for the very expensive wine in her glass. I listened as she painted her generous benefactor as a controlling meddler. This isn't a story about boundaries. This is a story about breathtaking ingratitude and a level of cruelty I have rarely witnessed. Carol is the kindest, most generous woman I have ever known. Perhaps before you all rush to judgment, you should ask the happy couple who paid for their house down payment, their new car, and every last napkin at this wedding. You should all be ashamed of yourselves for believing this one-sided, manipulative nonsense. A few other old family friends, people who had known me for decades, chimed in supporting Linda, asking questions. A few small cracks had appeared in Jessica's perfect wall of victimhood. But the real bombshell didn't come from Facebook. It landed in my email inbox about an hour later, like a gift from the heavens. The subject line was simple: your wedding photography contract. It was from the photographer, a young man named Ben whom I had met with and found to be thoroughly decent and professional. Dear Carol, he wrote, I am writing to you directly because something happened on Saturday that I feel you need to know about. I was deeply disturbed by the events that unfolded later in the day, and I want to extend my sincerest apologies for the chaos. But there is more. On Saturday morning, just before the ceremony, Jessica and her mother, Brenda, pulled me aside. Jessica had a copy of our contract, the one you and I signed, with several sections newly highlighted. She claimed there had been a clerical error, and that your name needed to be removed as the primary client and payment guarantor. She wanted me to sign a hastily prepared addendum stating that all remaining payments, a balance of $4,000, would be handled directly by her family's estate lawyer after the honeymoon. She mentioned something about a complex inheritance situation. My blood ran cold. Inheritance. It seemed very strange, Ben continued, and frankly suspicious. She was very insistent, and her mother was hovering in a way that made me uncomfortable. I told her I could not legally amend a contract without speaking to you, the person who had signed it and paid the substantial deposit. She became quite agitated and said I was ruining her morning. Given what happened later, I feel this information is extremely relevant. I believe she may have been attempting to secure my services fraudulently. I have attached a scan of the document she tried to get me to sign. I hope you are okay, and please let me know if I can be of any further assistance. I clicked open the attachment, and there it was in black and white. My name was crossed out with a pen. Vague, nonsensical legal terms about future payment from a non-existent lawyer were scribbled in the margins. It was a clumsy, blatant, and utterly damning attempt at fraud. She wasn't just trying to exclude me. She was trying to steal from the vendors, using my good name and my initial payments as cover. A hot, white-hot rage, the first real unadulterated anger I had felt through all of this, surged through my veins. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was about calculated, criminal deception. And she had been stupid enough to leave a paper trail. Jessica wanted to tell a story on social media. Fine. I suddenly had a much better story to tell. And unlike hers, every single word of mine was about to be backed up by cold, hard proof. The email from Ben the photographer was the spark that ignited a bonfire. The lingering fog of grief and shock that had clouded my mind finally burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged resolve. I was no longer a grieving mother. I was a woman building a case. For the next 2 days, my quiet suburban home office transformed into a war room. The scent of brewing coffee and hot toner from the printer filled the air. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I worked. I was methodical, meticulous, channeling all my pain into a singular focus. The assembly of undeniable truth. I went through years of financial records, my printer humming for hours as it spat out a mountain of evidence that would become my arsenal. I started with the big things, the foundational pillars of their lie. I printed the wire transfer statement from my savings account for the $40,000 down payment on their house. The memo line, which I had written with such love at the time, now read like a tragic irony. Congratulations on your new home. May it be filled with happiness. Love, Mom. I printed the co-signed auto loan agreement from the Ford dealership, my strong, clear signature on the guarantor line, a stark contrast to Michael's hesitant scrawl. I remembered the loan officer telling me, "You're really helping him out, ma'am. His debt-to-income ratio is a mess." Then I moved on to the wedding. I laid out the receipts and invoices on my large dining room table, arranging them like a general mapping a battlefield. The initial deposit check for the Willows for $10,000, dated almost a year ago. The carbon copy of the receipt from the designer bridal boutique in the city for Jessica's $7,000 lace gown. The detailed, multi-page invoice from Maria, the florist, for $6,000 worth of peonies, hydrangeas, and imported garden roses. The caterer, the band, the stationer who had printed the elegant, cream-colored invitations that I apparently wasn't worthy of receiving. It all added up to just over $53,000. I took a red pen and circled the totals, highlighting every payment confirmation, every date, every signature. It was a staggering monument to my own blind generosity. Next, I opened my laptop and delved into the digital record of their manipulation. My heart ached as I scrolled back through months of emails and text messages. Reading them now was like watching a horror movie where I was the clueless victim. They were filled with my son and his fiancée being so incredibly, sickeningly sweet. A text from Jessica in May. Carol, you are literally a lifesaver. The venue just released a Saturday in October, and we have to book it now or we'll lose it. The deposit is huge. Is there any chance you can help us out? We're so broke after the down payment. An email from Michael in July. Hey mom, we found the perfect band but they're a little over budget. Jess is heartbroken. I know we've asked for a lot but I was hoping you could help. I hate asking but my promotion at work isn't kicking in for another few months. I swear we'll pay you back. A text from Jessica in August with a picture of a centerpiece mock-up. Isn't it dreamy? It's a bit of an upgrade but so worth it, don't you think? You have such good taste, what do you think we should do? I took screenshots of everything. Every loving request. Every desperate plea for money. Every manipulative compliment. I arranged them in chronological order, a digital timeline of my own fleecing. Finally, I printed Ben the photographer's damning email and the fraudulent contract addendum Jessica had tried to make him sign. The crossed-out name, the vague legal terms, it was the smoking gun. I then called Linda and asked her to write down everything she remembered from the rehearsal dinner toast, to be as specific as possible. She emailed me a notarized statement an hour later, a scathing, detailed account of Jessica's performance. I arranged it all on the table. Stacks of paper that told a single, undeniable story. Not a story of a toxic, controlling mother who had a narcissistic breakdown, but a story of a trusting, loving, and perhaps foolishly generous mother who was systematically and ruthlessly exploited by her son and his manipulative, predatory fiancé. With all the evidence laid out before me, I sat down at my computer and began to write. I didn't write with the fire of anger or the bitterness of betrayal. I wrote with the cold, hard precision of an accountant. I started with a simple, direct title that I posted on my own Facebook page, making sure the privacy setting was public. The title was, The Other Side of the Wedding Story, a Matter of Receipts. I laid out the timeline, from the engagement to the wedding day, with methodical precision. I detailed every single dollar I had spent, not to shame them, but to dismantle their narrative of financial abuse, with the undeniable weight of my generosity. I embedded the screenshots of their own texts, their own sweet, manipulative words hanging them. I described the scene at the rehearsal dinner, quoting directly from Linda's notarized statement. I recounted the brutal, dismissive phone call with my son. And then, as the grand finale, I uploaded a crystal-clear scan of the fraudulent contract addendum, circling the part about the non-existent estate lawyer. I concluded the post with a simple, powerful paragraph. I did not ruin my son's wedding. My son's wedding was ruined the moment the bride and groom made the calculated decision that my presence was unwanted but my money was essential. Canceling the final payments was not an act of petty revenge. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the only tool they left me to reclaim my dignity from those who sought to strip me of it. This is my truth, and unlike their story, mine has receipts. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the mouse. This was it. The point of no return. I wasn't just posting on Facebook. I was dropping a precision-guided bomb into the middle of their carefully constructed narrative of lies. I clicked post. And then, for good measure, I emailed the entire package, the post, the scans of every document, the statements, to Sarah, the local news blogger who loved a good story of suburban drama. Then all I could do was wait for the fallout. The explosion was immediate and it was spectacular. My post didn't just go viral. It became a local phenomenon. The news blogger, Sarah, ran with it immediately, publishing a scathing, meticulously documented article titled, Toxic Mother-in-Law or Financial Predator. Receipts tell a very different wedding story. She embedded my documents, my screenshots, everything. My post was shared hundreds, then thousands of times. The narrative didn't just shift. It was a complete, brutal 180-degree reversal. Jessica's original post, once a shrine to her victimhood, became a digital pillory. It was flooded with new comments, people posting screenshots of my evidence, quoting her own manipulative texts back to her. Her wall of sympathy crumbled into a pit of public outrage and ridicule. Sometime on Tuesday afternoon, she deleted the post entirely, and then her whole profile vanished. But it was too late. The internet never forgets. I turned off my phone, unplugged my landline, and tried to insulate myself from the digital chaos I had unleashed. I felt vindicated, yes, but that feeling was tangled with a deep, profound sadness. This was my family I was exposing. This was the life I had helped build. Now going up in a blaze of public humiliation. There was no joy in it, only a grim sense of necessity. On Tuesday evening, just as I was sitting down with a cup of tea, trying to find a moment of peace in the quiet house, there was a sharp knock on my back door. It was Linda. I let her in, and she immediately wrapped me in a fierce hug. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something more than just concern. It was alarm. "Carol," she said. Her words rushed as she pulled back, still gripping my arms. "You need to sit down. I have to tell you something. I just got off the phone with my cousin Sharon. It's much worse than we thought." I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. Sharon, Linda's cousin, was a loan officer at the main branch of the county bank. "Worse how, Linda? What's happened?" "Sharon saw your post. The whole bank is talking about it," Linda began, taking a shaky breath. She felt she had to call me. Ethically, she was on the fence, but she said after what she read, after she saw the proof of what they did, she had to say something. "She was afraid for you." A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over me. "Afraid for me? Why?" "Michael and Jessica," Linda said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, even though we were alone in the house. "They were in the bank just 2 weeks ago. They applied for a massive business loan. $250,000. For some vaguely defined consulting firm Jessica wanted to start. I was confused. This was new. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," Linda said, her eyes flashing with anger. "Their application was a joke. They had no collateral, no real business plan, nothing. Sharon said the underwriters were going to deny them flat out. But Jessica, she was smooth. She told them to hold off on the official denial. She told Sharon that they were about to secure a major co-signer, a family investor with substantial assets and a perfect credit score. She assured them they would have the signed papers right after the wedding. The room started to spin. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so monstrous, so diabolical, that I could barely comprehend it. "But that's not the worst part, Carol," Linda continued, her voice thick with disgust. "That's not why Sharon was scared. She said Jessica was asking some very specific, very chilling questions. She was asking about the legal requirements in this state for gaining power of attorney over a parent's finances." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. "She told Sharon," Linda said, her words now coming out in a furious rush, "that her future mother-in-law, you Carol, was getting on in years. She used the words very forgetful and showing signs of rapid cognitive decline. She told Sharon that the whole family was getting very worried about your ability to handle your own affairs, especially since you were managing a considerable inheritance from your late husband after a protracted legal battle with a former business partner over the funeral costs. She was creating a narrative, Carol, a medical and legal one." I dropped my head into my hands, the world tilting violently. The keys in the freezer, my glasses in the bathroom, the missed appointments, the constant, subtle comments about my forgetfulness, the public toast at the rehearsal dinner, designed to paint me as controlling and emotionally unstable. It wasn't random cruelty. It was a strategy. They weren't just trying to isolate me emotionally. They were methodically, cruelly building a case. They were laying the groundwork to have me declared legally incompetent. Their full, horrifying plan was now sickeningly clear. Step 1. For months manufacture evidence of my mental decline. Step 2. Publicly humiliate me at the wedding, breaking my spirit and making me look unstable to the community. Step 3. I would come crawling back, desperate for my son's love and forgiveness, so broken and full of guilt that I would sign anything they put in front of me just to be let back into the family. I would sign the loan papers, and if I didn't, if I still had the strength to refuse, then they would move to their endgame. They would use the evidence they had been manufacturing for months, my so-called memory loss, my erratic and vindictive behavior of canceling the wedding payments, to petition a court for custody of my affairs. They would get a lawyer. They would try to take control of everything I owned. A wave of nausea so profound it almost made me gag washed over me. This was never about a wedding. It was never about hurt feelings or boundaries. This was a premeditated, predatory assault on my life. They hadn't just tried to bar me from a party. They had tried to steal my future, my independence, my money, and my very identity. And they had used my unconditional love for my son as the bait in their trap. The revelation about their plan to have me declared incompetent was a watershed moment. The personal betrayal, as deep and agonizing as it was, now seemed secondary to the calculated, predatory nature of their scheme. This was no longer just a family drama to be argued over on Facebook. This was a story about elder abuse, about financial predation, and it needed to be exposed to the bright, unforgiving light of day. The local news blogger Sarah, who had written the first explosive article, called me the next morning. Her voice was buzzing with a mixture of sympathy and journalistic fervor. "Carol, my article has been read by over 100,000 people in our area. The local news station, Channel 8, wants to do a follow-up story for the 6 o'clock broadcast. They want to interview you on camera." My first instinct was a visceral, gut-wrenching no. To hide. To lock my doors and pretend none of this had ever happened. The thought of putting my face, my raw pain, my family's grotesque dirty laundry, on television for the entire city to see was terrifying. I was a private person. A 65-year-old widow who enjoyed gardening and reading mystery novels. I was not a character in a primetime news exposé. But then I thought about their plan. I thought about the words Jessica had used with the lone officer. Cognitive decline, forgetful, unable to handle her affairs. They had wanted to paint me as a confused, incompetent, crazy old woman. And I realized the best, most powerful way to fight that lie wasn't to hide in the shadows, but to step directly into the spotlight. To let the world see for themselves that I was none of those things. To show them exactly who they were dealing with. A woman who was clear, articulate, and in complete and total control of her faculties. "I'll do it," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "But on one condition. We do it here in my home." The interview was that evening. The news van with its large Channel 8 logo felt alien and intrusive parked in my quiet suburban driveway. They set up lights and cameras in my living room, turning the cozy space where Tom and I used to read into a sterile television studio. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one with the slightly worn floral pattern, and consciously straightened my back. I had chosen my outfit carefully. A simple but elegant navy blue blouse. It was the color of strength and stability. I was not going to look like a victim. Sarah, the reporter, was professional and direct, but her eyes held a genuine sympathy that put me at ease. She started with the wedding day itself, and I recounted the story calmly, factually, my voice never wavering. But the real power of the interview came when she began to ask about my motivations. "Your daughter-in-law's now deleted post claimed your actions were an act of petty revenge because you couldn't stand not being the center of attention," Sarah said, looking at her notes. "How do you respond to that?" I looked directly into the main camera lens, not as if it were a piece of equipment, but as if it were a window into the living rooms of thousands of other women, other mothers who might be watching. "Attention is the last thing I ever wanted," I said, my voice clear and steady. "For 35 years, my life was dedicated to the happiness of my husband and my son. A mother's love is a supporting role. You're the one backstage making sure the lighting is right, that the costumes are perfect so that your star can shine. And you do it gladly without ever needing applause." I then reached for the meticulously organized file I had placed on the coffee table. "This isn't about feelings anymore," I continued, holding up the first document, a bank statement. "This is about facts. It's about the truth." One by one, I laid the evidence out on the table, the camera zooming in on each document as I spoke. I was no longer just telling a story, I was presenting a case. This is the $40,000 wire transfer for their house down payment. This is the co-signed auto loan that saved my son from a predatory interest rate after a previous deal, one that involved a shady divorce lawyer, fell through. These are the receipts for a $53,000 wedding. And these, I said, holding up the stack of printed screenshots, are the text messages asking for that money, filled with "I love yous" and "You're the best mom ever." The camera lingered on the screenshots, the contrast between their loving words and their cruel actions hanging heavy in the air. "And this," I said, my voice dropping slightly as I held up the final document, the email from the photographer. This is a scan of a fraudulent contract my daughter-in-law tried to pressure a vendor into signing on the morning of the wedding. An attempt to remove my name after I had already paid the $4,000 deposit and stick him with an unpaid bill. Finally, Sarah asked the question I knew was coming. The one that elevated this from a family drama to a public service announcement. Carol, there are serious and disturbing rumors, stemming from a confidential source at a local financial institution, that this was about more than just a wedding. Can you comment on the allegations of a large business loan and inquiries made into your financial competency? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was the moment of truth. My love was not the only thing they were trying to leverage, I said, looking straight into the camera again. They were trying to leverage my assets. For months they engaged in a subtle but persistent campaign to make me, and others, doubt my own mind. They were building a false narrative that I was losing my memory and becoming unstable. They were laying the groundwork to take legal control of my finances, of the inheritance my husband worked his entire life to build. This wasn't a family squabble. It was a conspiracy. I finished by leaning forward slightly, my gaze intense. I didn't do this interview to be vindictive. I did it because when you are pushed to the absolute edge by the people you love most, you have two choices. You can crumble into dust, or you can fight back with the truth. I chose to fight back. Not just for me, but for any parent, any person who has ever been made to feel that their worth is tied directly to their wallet. Love should not be a transaction. The interview ended. The crew packed up their equipment, the bright lights were turned off, and my house was my own again. It was quiet. I had told my story. I had shown my proof. The truth was out there now, undeniable and armed with facts. All that was left was the final, inevitable confrontation. I knew they would come. The interview aired at 6 o'clock on the Tuesday evening news. At 7:30 my doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite, neighborly ring. It was a frantic, sustained, desperate buzzing, the sound of someone leaning on it with their entire body weight, as if trying to push their will through the very wires. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The distorted fisheye lens showed me a tableau of desperation. The whole delegation of the damned was huddled on my front porch. Michael, his face pale and blotchy with tears, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Jessica, looking haggard and terrified, her carefully constructed mask of confident superiority completely shattered. She looked small and venomous. And behind them her mother Brenda, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days, her face a mask of fury and fear. I took a moment. I smoothed the front of my sweater, took a deep, steadying breath that filled my lungs with calm, and opened the door. I didn't open it all the way. I stood in the threshold, my hand on the doorknob, my body a physical barrier. I did not invite them in. Mom! Michael's voice was a choked, pathetic sob. He took a clumsy step forward, his hands outstretched as if to clutch at me, to hug me. I didn't move an inch. He stopped, his hands falling limply to his sides, the gesture of a supplicant. Mom, please. We saw the interview. We need to talk. We can fix this. Please let us in. Fix what, Michael? I asked. My voice was not angry, not sad, just quiet and unyielding. Fix the public humiliation? Fix the lies you told on social media? Or fix the fact that, as I understand it, your $25,000 line of credit for the business loan was just frozen by the bank this morning? His face crumpled, a confirmation of everything. Jessica shot him a panicked, furious look. She quickly stepped forward, trying to force a smile onto her pale, pinched face, but it looked more like the grimace of a cornered animal. Carol. Mom, it was all a horrible misunderstanding. The wedding, the stress, we got terrible advice. We made terrible mistakes. We were wrong. We're so sorry. We'll do anything. I've deleted my social media. We'll post a public apology on your page. We can tell everyone it was just a crazy family mix-up, that we've reconciled. A mix-up? I repeated, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. I looked past her, my gaze locking onto my son's. He was refusing to meet my eyes, staring instead at a crack in the porch concrete. Was it a mix-up when you told me on the phone that my presence at your wedding would cause drama? Was it a mix-up when you stood by and let your fiancé plaster my face on a security blacklist like a common criminal? He flinched as if I'd struck him. He still couldn't look at me. I turned my gaze, cold as a winter morning, to Jessica. And the lone Jessica. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about sitting in a bank manager's office and telling her that your new mother-in-law was suffering from rapid cognitive decline. The color drained completely from her face. She started to stammer, her eyes darting around wildly. I never. Who told you that? That's a lie. That lawyer of yours is just trying to. I don't have a lawyer, Jessica, I said, my voice like ice. What I have is the truth. And my question is for my son. Michael, look at me. Slowly, reluctantly, he lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and full of a self-pity that sickened me. Did you know? I asked softly. Did you know about her plan to tell the bank I was losing my mind? Did you know she was inquiring about taking power of attorney over my finances? He opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence was a confession, louder and more damning than any word he could have uttered. He finally broke, the words tumbling out in a pathetic rush. It wasn't supposed to be like that. It was just a backup plan. Jessica's idea, she said. She said you'd be so hurt after the wedding, so desperate to get back in our lives that you'd be grateful for the chance. That you would sign the loan papers to prove you loved me, and wanted me to have a good start for my promotion. It was for our future, Mom. For your grandchildren. The mention of grandchildren, a future they had tried to steal from me, was the final brutal insult. So you admit it, I said softly. It wasn't a question. It was a final judgment. Please, Mom, he begged, the tears flowing freely now, a disgusting performance of remorse. Please, we're ruined. The bank called the loan. My boss called me into his office today. The scandal. They're talking about my custody agreement with my ex-wife. People are calling me a monster. Please, you have to help us. You're my mother. You're the only one who can fix this. I looked at his face, the face I had once loved more than life itself. And for a fleeting, agonizing moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he fell and scraped his knee, crying for me to kiss it and make it all better. The maternal instinct, deep and primal, flickered within me, a ghost of a feeling. But then I looked at Jessica, standing behind him, her eyes filled not with remorse, but with a cold reptilian calculation. And I knew that the little boy I loved was truly gone, replaced by this weak, spineless man who had stood by and let this happen, who had participated in it. I looked back at my son one last time. You're right, I said, my voice surprisingly gentle. He looked up, a pathetic flicker of hope in his wet eyes. One person could have fixed all of this for you, I continued, my voice even. The woman who would have forgiven you for this monstrous betrayal. The woman who would have mortgaged her house to save you. Who would have protected you from your own disastrous mistakes because her love was unconditional. That woman could have fixed this. I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the hope on his face curdle into confusion. But that woman, I said, my voice hardening again as I stepped back and began to close the door, died last Saturday morning when she saw her own face on a security blacklist. The person standing here now is a stranger. And I don't help strangers. I closed the door on his final desperate sob of my name. I turned the deadbolt, the solid thunk echoing in the sudden silence. I leaned my back against the solid wood, listening as they finally gave up, their frantic, whispered argument fading as their footsteps retreated down the path. The house was quiet, and in that profound silence, I felt a wave of something I hadn't felt in years. Not grief, not anger. It was peace. A profound sense of peace. I had lost a son, but I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my self-respect. And I knew with an absolute certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had finally truly fixed everything. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt it was important. My question for you all is this. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect your own peace and dignity, even if it meant cutting ties with someone you loved? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more. You are not alone.